So in the latest points update, a whole load of units got most of their gear completely free. Generally it's quite a nice feels good boost, but I can't help but think that it has some drawbacks. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today I just wanted to talk briefly about a slightly weird change that Games Workshop has been doing with quite a few datasheets recently. Namely, basically giving the unit a nice boost by casually taking every single bit of fancy war gear, special guns, or combat weapons that the unit could take, and then just make it cost absolutely 0 points. One of the more recent ones were guard infantry squads in the recent balanced data slate, but now it's across quite a few different armies now they've done this next points update. Basically, Games Workshop just seems to be trying to make certain units more relevant, and rather than just chip away at the base cost of the units and make your standard guys cheaper, there'll definitely be a better value proposition if they get a whole load of random fun things thrown in for free, like special or heavy weapons. I think the initial reaction to most of these changes is generally quite a positive one. It's just quite good fun to take a bunch of units that were typically just run bare bones with standard guns, and then to suddenly say all the upgrades that were a bit too overpriced before, you can basically have all of those guilt free without making the squad far too expensive for what it does in a list if you're trying to actually make it kind of strong. It's definitely not completely unprecedented. In the past you had to pay for certain upgrades like say bolt pistols or crack grenades and things, and standard Space Marines just get all of them included all the time now. I guess it just depends whether or not you'd expect to say have every single guard squad have a Voxcaster in the unit for example, or squads in general just to be massively tooled up with free gear or not. I'd say some of the most obvious examples recently are certainly those guard infantry squads. They were 55 points and you paid the cost for the different special and heavy weapons and things. Now they're 60 points, so up 5, but you can stack the squad quite high with upgrades, things like power swords and plasma pistols on the sergeant, a special weapon like a plasma gun, and a heavy weapon like a las cannon. Basically just in one quick change, Games Workshop turned the arguably best guard infantry squad, just being the very cheap bare bones one with las guns, into one that always wants to take stacks of gear just built into its basic points cost. I thought that was perhaps just one little quirky unit that they were doing in the meantime until Guard eventually get their codex update, but it seems that it's a way that they're going to rebalance quite a few units now. Plague Marines were another really big example. Again, literally everything on their datasheet is free, and I'd argue it's probably even more meaningful than the Guard Infantry squad, as pretty much every model in the squad could take a fancy gun upgrade or melee weapon of some sort. Now they're going to have all sorts of unique squad members spreading contagions in their own favourite way. They went from a squad that you'd usually want to keep at least fairly cheap, into suddenly being one of the most dangerous for the points melee threats in the entire Death Guard codex. It's kind of similar for Rubric Marines. They didn't get quite as much extensive stuff, but their Icon of Flame and Warp Flame pistols are both free. Basically means that you always want to have the Icon in the squad, and it always makes sense to upgrade the Bolt pistol on the Sergeant to a Warp Flame pistol. And they both had Warp Flamers and the Soul Reaper cannon vastly discounted, so they're more tempting. Kind of interesting to see Games Workshop making a mixed approach. A few things still cost a bit but cheaper, whereas some things you basically always want to take now. There are a few other examples as well. Guard Sentinels as well are a pretty weird case. Now they cost 40 points, not 35, but you may as well always equip them with a very fancy weapon like a las cannon, missile launcher, or heavy flamer, as opposed to the cheap multi-laser which just feels outclassed compared with those. As well as that, it's a similar story for the Eliminator las fusils. They're free over the Bolt sniper rifles, and feel to me like just the superior option now, though the Bolt snipers do have a bit of a different role I guess in hunting down characters, and there's plenty of other guard sets that have plenty of options free as well, or options that don't cost any more than each other, say special weapon squads with plasma guns and grenade launchers. I thought it might just be interesting to talk about a few people's reactions to them and some of the positives and negatives of making all this gear free and allowing you to bundle loads of stuff onto your squads. First up, let's talk through some positives. I think perhaps one of the best reasons that the change has gone down quite well is that having lots of exciting upgrades in the squads is just generally quite fun. I think most people, if they have the option, would want to include something like a massively powerful las cannon or an exciting special weapon like a plasma or melter gun, and when those options happen to be overcosted on the WARGEAR table, it can just be a bit sad to have nothing but basic guys be the most optimal pick. In a squad like the Guard Infantry squad, I think it does really feel quite interesting to be able to look again at all the different options, and then basically pick your favourite out of the Sergeant, Special and Heavy weapons, because there's absolutely no reason not to. It's quite nice for things with fun but maybe not all that powerful rules, things like Guard Voxcasters or Chaos Icons and things. Generally they often tend to be in the place where they're almost always worth it or almost never worth it, with very little in between. As well as that, it does seem that Games Workshop are using this as a balance tool. both perhaps to actually get units used in other roles. Again, I perhaps feel that Death Guard Plague Marines were a bit more of an example of that, a unit that was kind of outcompeted by Terminators for damage dealers, and perhaps things like cheap Poxwalkers and Cultists for holding down objectives, so making them the squad where you get all the fancy gear rolled into their datasheet will give them a new lease of life. As well as that, it could give struggling factions a bit of a shot in the arm. Before all these rules changes, certainly armies like Death Guard and Imperial Guard weren't doing so solidly, so it does seem like a small truckload of free gear has been assigned to help them out and just make them that little bit better. Finally, I think you could argue that regardless of points, some options tend to usually wind up being the best or worst to pick anyway. With at least the majority of datasheets, Games Workshop does seem to generally aim for making each bit of war gear usable. But to be honest, it's kind of rare that every single loadout of a squad is equally viable. Almost always something winds up best. It's not really the ideal state of affairs, but it does seem to be the way that Warhammer has almost always shaken out. And even if it might be bad news for certain less expensive bits of kit, it still just basically changes what's best to being a different set of things, rather than the set of things that it might have been if they tried to actually balance the war gear pieces. That does sort of bring us to downsides though. Firstly, I guess one small thing might be that squads are just a little bit more annoyingly complex than they were. Not exactly the worst thing in the world for some units, say when you've got like one special and one heavy weapon in the unit, that's usually fairly manageable. Though even then that is going to take a little bit more time and thought as you have to roll those attacks out separately and choose targets and stuff. Particularly for the new Plague Marines though, I think that their optimal loadout is basically to spam one of each of their various different plague weapons, so when you're resolving combat for them, it is going to be a bit more of a long drawn out process. You'll have to roll each of those attacks separately, and work out every single model where it is and what it can attack, and maybe make some slightly harder decisions as to what they choose to target if they have choice. To be fair, that is a bit more of a flaw of the Plague Marine datasheet than anything else. There's a whole load of bullet points going on in that one. I'd say perhaps the biggest single negative, though, is that it makes many options a bit redundant. Most obviously, just spamming cheap units of guys with guns is no longer the best play if you get the special things upgraded for free. There's basically no balance between taking a guard squad without a melter gun and one with, trading a couple of strength 3 last shots for a massive vehicle destroying strength 8 damage d6 plus 2 weapon. That does seem like a bit of a no-brainer. I suppose at least for guard, if you did have loads of las guns, you might be able to field them as conscripts, but still it doesn't feel very internally balanced on the datasheet itself. Otherwise, there's just a whole load of bits of war gear that are now going to be almost flatly redundant. Say multi-lasers for sentinels, they're rarely going to ever be the best choice compared with las cannons, missile launchers, or heavy flamers, or grenade launchers for the Imperial Guard. I just can't really see people wanting to take them when you could get a plasma gun or melter gun. I can't help but think that most people, rather than just having completely free gear on squads, would much rather have each weapon option have a ideal points cost, one where it does see play in certain builds but isn't an auto-include, and is also cheap enough to be worth considering over just the complete bare-bones squad with no extra guns. By ditching points cost for gear entirely, it does kind of seem a strange way of just not really even trying to balance the options. Finally, and maybe I've got my tinfoil hat on just a little bit here, but it maybe does just feel a little bit like Games Workshop just rotating what's best for a squad, perhaps as a bit of a sales ploy to get you to pick up another copy of the unit and arm it with different things. A lot of people like to slowly build towards things that are stronger for their army, and now if you're running Death Guard, you're kind of incentivized to pick up a Plague Marine squad that's got lots of the cool combat weapons where you might not own any of them before. Or if you had a bunch of Eliminators with bolt sniper rifles from, say, the Combat Patrol previously, you might be a bit more tempted to pick up some of them with las fusils as well, seeing as they probably got better than the bolt sniper rifles overall. What's more, I do feel that when the next codex drops, it might just well be a big flip back to the previous state of affairs. Say in the new guard codex, they might just have itemised points costs for all their different bits of war gear, and it might just suddenly revert that fielding mass las guns and infantry squads is the best thing to do again. I'd definitely be wary about massively investing in new things to take advantage of these changes, and if you are doing so, I would bear in mind that things might move on in the future. So anyway, let me know what you think of the free war gear being handed out to rather a lot of 40k factions then. I think there are some positives and negatives. Overall, I think it's kind of fun though, at least in the short term. Maybe as a bit more of a temporary thing to boost some struggling armies, gives them some more interesting things to build around. But I'm not sure it'd be the most fun if like literally everything in 40k went this way. I think it is quite fun having different bits of war gear that in theory should be somewhat balanced against each other and useful in different situations. Can't help but think just quite a lot of the things will get overlooked if this did get farmed out en masse. In any case, if you enjoyed the video, feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, or I'll certainly keep the regular videos coming, with new ones out just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying the videos on the channel, I would just like to quickly mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page, and you can find that down in the video description if you're interested. The channel's Patreon is what allows me to keep on making videos like this quite so regularly, so if you are watching a lot, any support is enormously appreciated. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.